The wind howled across the Montana plains like a restless ghost that refused to sleep, carrying the scent of dust, pine, and distance. Eliza Wren tightened the faded shawl around her shoulders as the creaking wagon carried her closer to a future she had never wanted but could no longer escape. The letter that had sealed her fate rested in her lap, creased, worn, and signed by a man known only as the Iron Rancher. It was said he built an empire from nothing but raw land and calloused hands, a man whose heart was as cold as the steel he worked with, whose gaze could silence even the fiercest of men. Eliza hadn't chosen him out of love, she had chosen him out of desperation. Her father's debts had swallowed their farm whole, and her 2 little brothers would soon be out on the street if she didn't do something drastic. When word came that the Iron Rancher sought a wife, a deal sealed by marriage to provide him an heir and her family financial salvation, she had signed her name without hesitation, even though her heart trembled at every stroke of the pen. The wagon stopped at the edge of the sprawling Iron Creek Ranch. Before her rose a fortress of timber and stone, not just a home but a statement carved into the wilderness. Men worked in silence, fixing fences, breaking horses, stacking hay bales under the golden sunset. And then she saw him, standing by the corral, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that made the air feel heavier. His name was James Dalton, but folks called him the Iron Rancher. His eyes, cold as a winter river, lifted to meet hers, and she felt something deep within her chest tighten, a mixture of fear and curiosity, of dread and something she didn't yet understand. He didn't smile when she stepped down, he simply nodded once, as though she were another part of his land he'd acquired. "Mrs. Dalton," he said, his voice low, rough, and commanding. "Let's get you settled. The papers are signed. You're home now." Home. The word hit harder than she expected. This wasn't home, it was a cage dressed in the skin of freedom. But as he offered his hand to help her down, she noticed the roughness of his palm, the quiet steadiness in his strength. It wasn't just a rancher's hand, it was a man who had fought for every inch of what he owned. And somehow, that steadiness grounded her. The house inside was grand in size but spare in warmth. Every object had a purpose, every corner spoke of work, not comfort. Dinner was silent save for the crackle of the fire. He didn't ask about her family, and she didn't ask about the scars on his knuckles or the faint limp in his walk. They were 2 strangers tied together by circumstance and survival, sitting in a room thick with unspoken words. Later that night, the sky darkened into a velvet expanse of stars. Eliza stood by the window of her new room, still in her wedding dress, watching the moonlight spill across the fields like liquid silver. Her heart ached for her brothers, for the laughter that once filled her family home. She had traded her freedom for their safety, but in the stillness of that night, she wondered if she had also traded her soul. Behind her, she heard slow, deliberate footsteps, his footsteps. James Dalton appeared in the doorway, his face unreadable in the dim light. "You don't need to be afraid of me," he said quietly, as though sensing the storm inside her. "I don't hurt what's mine." His words were simple, but something in the way he said them made her pulse quicken, not out of fear, but confusion. There was something softer hidden beneath the iron. He stepped closer, his shadow stretching toward her. The firelight caught the side of his face, revealing a scar that ran from his jaw to his neck, a reminder of battles fought long before she arrived. "You married me to save them," he said. "I married you because I don't have time for games or liars. You'll find I'm not gentle, but I'm fair." She turned toward him, her voice trembling. "And if I want neither." His jaw tightened, but his eyes flickered with something that wasn't anger, something closer to respect. "Then we'll learn to want something better," he murmured. The silence that followed was thick with tension, the kind that made the air hum. For the first time, she met his gaze without flinching. "You could have any woman," she whispered. "Why me?" He studied her for a long moment. "Because you didn't beg," he said simply. "You signed that paper with fire in your eyes. You're not broken, Eliza Wren, you're just cornered. And I don't take pleasure in breaking what's already fighting to survive." That night, when he finally reached for her hand, she expected his touch to be cold, harsh, another reminder of the bargain she had struck. But it wasn't. His hand was warm, steady, almost careful, as though he knew she might shatter if handled wrong. And that simple touch, so unexpected, stole her breath. She felt the walls around her heart tremble, not from fear, but from a fragile hope she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the first crack in the armor of her resolve. As the moon climbed higher, painting the ranch in silver light, Eliza lay awake long after he left the room. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the echoes of old stories and new beginnings. Somewhere deep inside, she realized that maybe the Iron Rancher wasn't made of iron at all. Maybe he had simply built his armor to survive a world that gave no mercy. And maybe, just maybe, she had been brought here not only to save her family, but to save something inside him too. Her new life had just begun. The story of the Iron Rancher and the woman who dared to marry him for survival was far from over. It had only taken its first, trembling breath. The morning sun spilled across the valley like liquid gold, stretching over the fences, the fields, and the quiet hills of Iron Creek Ranch. It was the first dawn Eliza saw as Mrs. Dalton, and though the world looked the same, something inside her had shifted. The cold night had left her uneasy, her heart caught between duty and an unfamiliar warmth she dared not name. When she stepped outside, she found James already at work, reins in hand, commanding a half-wild stallion with calm authority. His shirt clung to his back, his movements strong, deliberate, every muscle carved by years of labor and solitude. Men obeyed him without question, and even the horses seemed to understand that resistance was useless. Eliza watched quietly, unseen from the porch, and realized that his power didn't come from cruelty, it came from control. Everything about him spoke of a man who had learned to master pain instead of letting it master him. As days passed, she learned that the Iron Rancher was a man of few words but unspoken kindness. He left bread on her table before dawn, fixed a leak in her roof without asking, and always made sure the fire burned warm in her room before night fell. Yet he never crossed the fragile distance between them again. The ranch hands whispered that their boss had once been engaged, that the woman he loved had been taken by fever, and since then, his heart had been buried deeper than his roots in the land. Eliza didn't ask. She knew the look of loss when she saw it. But sometimes, when she caught him glancing at her while she read by the window, she wondered if he was seeing her or a memory he couldn't let go of. Then came the storm. The sky darkened one afternoon without warning, the wind howling like a wounded beast. Lightning split the heavens as rain poured down, turning the earth to mud. A terrified ranch hand burst through the door shouting that the herd had broken through the southern fence. James grabbed his hat and rifle without hesitation. "Stay inside," he ordered, but Eliza, her heart pounding, ran after him anyway. The storm lashed against them, wind tearing at her dress as she stumbled through the mud. She found him waist-deep in chaos, horses thrashing, thunder cracking above. Without thinking, she grabbed a rope and waded into the corral beside him. He turned, eyes flashing with both fury and fear. "What in God's name are you doing?" he shouted over the wind. "Helping," she gasped. Together, they fought to drive the herd back, their voices drowned by rain, their hands raw and cold. When the storm finally broke and the herd calmed, Eliza stood trembling, drenched to the bone, her breath ragged. James stared at her, really stared, and for the first time, his expression broke. "You could have been killed," he said, his voice rough with something dangerously close to panic. "So could you," she whispered back, eyes burning. "But you didn't ask me to marry you to hide behind walls." Silence fell between them, thick and charged. The rain softened to a drizzle, and then, suddenly, inevitably, he reached for her. His hand cupped her cheek, fingers trembling ever so slightly, as though he was touching something fragile, something forbidden. "You drive me insane," he murmured, his voice breaking under the weight of everything he'd held back. "You make me feel things I thought were long dead." The kiss that followed wasn't soft. It was fire meeting steel, years of loneliness melting into one trembling heartbeat. When he finally pulled away, his breath was unsteady. "You shouldn't have followed me," he said quietly. "And yet," she replied, her voice barely a whisper, "I'd do it again." The look he gave her then was one she would never forget, a look that said he didn't know whether to thank her or run from her. Days turned to weeks, and something unspoken grew between them, like a seed pushing through frozen ground. He began teaching her how to ride, how to mend fences, how to read the sky for storms. She began to see the man beneath the iron, the boy who had lost too much too young, who built walls not out of pride, but protection. But peace on the frontier never lasted long. One evening, a rider arrived from town, dust-streaked and pale. "There's trouble," he said. "Your father's old creditor's back, he's bought up half the land around here." Says he'll take what's his, even if he has to burn this place down to get it. Eliza froze. She knew the name before the man even said it, Victor Harlan. The same ruthless banker who had driven her family to ruin. And now he wanted more. That night, James loaded his rifle in silence. Eliza stood by the fire, her voice shaking. "This is my fault," she said. "If I hadn't," he stopped her with a look. "Don't you dare blame yourself," he said. "You married me to save them. Now it's my turn to save you." When Harlan's men rode up at dawn, guns drawn, they found more than they bargained for. The Iron Rancher stood tall at the gate, his voice steady as iron. "You've taken enough," he said. "You won't take her too." Shots rang out, chaos erupted, and the ranch became a battlefield. But through the smoke and fear, Eliza didn't hide. She stood beside him, rifle in hand, fighting not for survival, but for the life they had begun to build. When the dust finally settled, Harlan was gone, his men scattered. The ranch was scarred but still standing. James turned to her, blood on his sleeve, and for the first time since she met him, she saw something like peace in his eyes. "You're stronger than I ever imagined," he said. "You always were," she replied. "You just never looked close enough." He smiled then, just barely, but it was real. "Then maybe it's time I start." That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills and painted the sky in gold, Eliza sat beside him on the porch. The world was quiet, the land stretching endless before them. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her without a word. They didn't need words. The storm, the struggle, the silence, it had all been worth it to find this moment of stillness. The Iron Rancher was no longer just a man of stone and solitude. He was a man who had learned to feel again. And Eliza, once a girl who married to survive, had found not just safety, but home. The wind carried the faint sounds of life from the ranch, laughter, hammers, the steady heartbeat of work. A new day was coming, and they would face it together. Whatever scars remained, they were proof of what they had endured. The iron had bent, but it had not broken.